My name is David Van Zandt, and I'm the president here at the New School, and I want to welcome you all on what I think is a sort of a rainy, a little cold night, and it's great to have all of you here. And it's my real pleasure to welcome you to the New School in this event on the power of progressive education, which poses a critical question, I think, which is, can creativity be taught? So I'd like to thank everyone for coming out tonight. Our speakers, we have a wonderful lineup here for you to discuss these issues. I've had my own opportunity to enjoy them and get to know them, and it's quite an impressive group of visionary leaders and risk takers who are very thoughtful about the ways in which education needs to adapt to what's happening now in the world. We're also very pleased here at the New School to partner with the City and Country School. It's been a pleasure of mine to get to know your principal, Kate Turley, and the New School and CNC are in the same neighborhood. We're neighbors in the village. We also began around the same time. City and Country began in 1914, I think, and we began here in 1919. We both, I think, have inspiring histories and also, though, auspicious futures, which I think is what we're talking about today. We were founded on common values, progressive approaches to teaching in which we're deeply connected to our communities and committed to preparing our students to succeed in a changing world. But our topic tonight, progressive education, is a very interesting one, but it's also, in one sense, a very ubiquitous one. It has its roots in John Dewey and the other members of the progressive movement of the early 20th century. In fact, in this day and age, it's become a pretty general term, and I think what we need to do is come back to it and figure out what it really means, particularly in the modern context. Just as a side note, I was very happy to find a progressive school in City and Country that doesn't claim to have been founded by John Dewey. He seems to have found everything going on in higher education today. So I do think over the long period of time that we've had this idea of progressive education, its meaning has become somewhat obscure. It's very easy to claim you are progressive. After all, who would want to be the opposite, retrogressive? Right? Or regressive, whatever. Nobody's going to say that. But I think there are some common elements to it that we share, both between City and Country and the New School, which have to do, first of all, with experiential learning by doing. I think that's very important. Second, it's a student-centered learning approach in which student participation is so important. They teach themselves in some ways under the guidance of a teacher. And finally, it's iterative learning. It's not didactic. That is, it puts students into situations where they have to constantly try to find solutions, repeat those processes, fail, right, and learn from those failures when they can. So we at the New School, I think, have been involved in this for a very long time. On the other hand, we now, when we look at what's happening in the modern world, we have to adjust, and we have to adjust to our sense of what progressive education is. And this is a world today that's very different than certainly even when I was in school, not to mention John Dewey a while ago. It's a world in which it's certainly much more global. It's a world in which innovation and creativity are given rewards far in excess of what they used to be given, and in some people's minds, sometimes excessive rewards in the economy. But it's a fact of life now that the people who are really contributing or getting ahead, no matter what your metric is, are people who are highly creative and innovative. The person who simply is very good technically at doing the same thing over and over again is falling behind in sort of the economic race that's going on. So we at the New School have had over time to adjust what we do. I mean, we've been founded on values of creativity and innovation, and also social engagement, being engaged with the community around us. But that's meant different things at different periods of our history, and we're embarking on a new one now. And it's really focused a lot on the sense of creativity that comes from the concept of design. The New School is the only university I know of in the world in which there's a large and comprehensive design school, Parsons, our Parsons School, in the heart of a very strong social science and liberal arts academy. And we think that's very auspicious for us in the sense that being creative and being innovative is not necessarily just about technology, or it's not just about being artistic. It's about human interface. It's about interacting with people, coming up with creative solutions. How do we interact with objects or environments or other people in a way that makes the world better? So design itself as a concept has moved away from the idea of being just craft-based to one of being a broad-based human problem-solving effort. And in order to do that, you have to know a lot about society. You have to know a lot about culture. The idea of the craftsman just sitting in their studio alone, coming up with creative things is long gone. Today it's really about what's happening in the world, not just locally but also globally. We believe here that in order for our students at the higher education level to succeed once they leave here, they have to develop this capacity. They have to do the things that a traditional higher ed makes you do. You think critically, be able to read, be able to write, and those sorts of things. But also today, I think our students need a set of creative capacities or competencies, which are increasingly important. They involve things such as being able to see patterns where other people don't. Being certainly comfortable with change and with careers that are not doing one thing for an entire career. Our students today just change jobs with a great deal of frequency. Another is being willing to fail or to take risks, however you want to put it, but with the idea of learning. And that goes back to this concept of iterative learning. That is, you learn by doing things, and sometimes they don't work out with the result that you want, and other times, and you learn from that when that happens. I think being able to communicate not only in speech and writing, the traditional forms, but also in other media is becoming extremely important. And finally, our students need to be able to process large amounts of very complex information, and they have to look at multiple interpretations of it. They have to be comfortable with that. Again, they can't, while you need to be deep in some area, you also though need to be comfortable and facile with a whole range of different kinds of information as you go forward. And we believe that's best done in the progressive fashion. We call it project-based work. That is actually undertaking a project that's going to have some impact on the world, whether it's a product design or it's a social innovation of figuring out a better way to do something that improves the world. So, this is to us very important. That's why this conversation this evening is so interesting. So before I turn it over to Kate Turley, one last thing I want to say is that many of you in the community probably know there's a large building going up on 5th Avenue and 14th Street. That's our new University Center, which in one sense is an emblem of what we're doing here because we're putting all our programs together in that one building. We are going to have an open house. The building is opening in a couple of weeks. We'll have an open house on Saturday, January 25th from 12 to 4. Please stop in, look around. You can look around the building. It's a very exciting building because of its design, both from the outside, but even more importantly, once you get inside the building, the way it's designed in order to encourage interaction between different students in our various different programs, students and faculty throughout the school. So again, welcome to all of you. Thanks to City and Country School for putting this on. It's now my great pleasure to introduce your principal, Kate Turley, and I look forward to many more discussions with her. We've just started a friendship. Kate?
Good evening. It's great to see all of you out there in the audience. Thank you, David, and the New School for this opportunity. This is the first time that City and Country has sponsored a symposium, and we are delighted to be partnering with the New School. And of course, I too want to thank our panelists for their participation, and I'm looking forward to our conversation. This is an exciting time for City and Country. We are celebrating our 100th year. Of course, that's exciting. But more important is that we are celebrating 100 years of an approach to learning for children. While City and Country may be celebrating its century, we, educators, parents, learners, citizens, are well into the 21st century. The pace of change is rapid. The 20th century view of teaching, the sage on the stage, has been shoved aside for the new demands of work and success today. The skills needed for professional and personal success have evolved as well. 4 skills often identified are communication, critical thinking, collaboration, creativity. And yes, they all do begin with C. As the principal of City and Country here tonight, I can say with certainty that these 21st century skills are the foundation of a City and Country education. We have been supporting children to be creative thinkers for 100 years now. Caroline Pratt, City and Country's founder, was an innovative teacher at the forefront of American educational reform. Directly addressing what she observed as the mode of learning natural to children, Pratt developed alternatives to, quote, the repression of formal education, unquote. In Pratt's vision for children to engage in their learning, to build from what they know, and to learn from others, they need time and materials. Caroline Pratt's genius stems from the materials she developed to put her ideas into practice. Caroline Pratt is recognized as the inventor of unit blocks. Of course, there are precedents, Froebel's Gifts, Patty Hill. From the school's beginning, Pratt considered blocks to be the most flexible and open-ended material. She standardized blocks forms, and the forms are those we use today. Her genius is not just the indoor blocks, but outdoor blocks and other open-ended materials, boards, boxes, sawhorses, barrels, things she created. They are in active use at City and Country and adopted by other early childhood programs. Blocks, indoor and outdoor, are the mainspring of the curriculum at C&C today. They offer children multiple and diverse opportunities to express their understanding of the social and physical world in which they live. Working collaboratively to design block buildings, children learn to articulate and solve problems, to negotiate and to cooperate. Our curriculum, using these open-ended materials, fosters independence, motivation, and interest, essential components of learning. The blocks speak, too, to the essential role of play in children's development and the social nature of learning. A second innovative program developed by our founder is our jobs program. Children will learn best if engaged in real-life situations that are important to them. In the 3rd through 8th grades, each group has a specific job to carry out that helps the school. Our students develop a genuine sense of ownership and pride in their contribution to the community. And you're going to hear more about our jobs program from Bruce a little later in the program. What does City and Country offer today? The shift from an industrial to a digital and global economy has generated numerous books and articles identifying the skills needed for success in the 21st century work world. I mentioned 4 earlier: critical thinking, creativity, collaboration, and communication, to which I add curiosity, innovation, problem solving, and resilience. These characteristics are embedded, not just added on, in a City and Country education, starting at age 2. And they are reinforced daily. So here's what it looks like. So here you see a classroom with blocks before the children begin. And here you see what the room looks like with the children at work. And you see collaboration, creativity, problem solving, failure, and resilience. Here is the outdoor block yard. And this is what it looks like at the beginning of each period. Ready for children. And here's what happens when they are there together. At City and Country, we believe that progressive education practices and theories are as relevant and modern today as they were radical in 1914. The materials Caroline Pratt invented elicit imaginative thinking and allow children limitless opportunities for creating. These materials, our program, our views about how children learn, support the skills needed for success today and tomorrow. In fact, I think it's fair to say the daily use of open-ended materials guarantees the development of creative thinkers. Thank you.
Thank you. You know, when I'm out and about talking to corporations about how to be more creative and innovative, they're invariably at the end of the day, end of a very, very long day, usually over drinks, someone leans over and says, "Look, Bruce, really, tell me one thing I can do Monday morning to make me more creative." And I always have one answer for them. To make oneself more creative, simply surround yourself with more creative people. And tonight we have done that. We have an incredible group of people on the stage and in the audience who are wildly creative. And so I'm hoping we're going to have a happy and good time because of that. I'm promised that. So I'm going to launch into a little talk here about creativity and education and entrepreneurialism and where we are today and why it all seems to be coming together. Okay? And I just, 3 days ago, I was in Angkor Wat having a wonderful time watching the sunrise. And I'm a little jet lagged, I'm barely here, so I'm going to use a lot of paper, okay? Forgive me. So here we go. Some years back, IBM did one of its annual global CEO surveys. It asked 1,500 chief executives around the world what was the single most important leadership trait, ability. And the majority answered creativity. They didn't say strategy, and they didn't say operations or marketing. They said creativity. Now, at that time, I was running the editorial page at Business Week, and I was absolutely stunned. I'd never before seen anything like this, where creativity was described by CEOs as central to their generating economic value for their corporations. So, being a good journalist, I asked 3 questions. First, why now? Why were a lot of middle-aged white guys trained in business school in the analytics of efficiency suddenly interested in creativity, which they usually associated with art and fashion, drapes, music, film, writing? Okay. Secondly, what the heck is creativity anyhow? Okay. And third, where do you go to get more of this creativity? How do you actually learn to increase your creative capacity? In fact, how do you even measure creativity? So I worked on this for a couple of years. I came here, really worked on this with students and colleagues. And these are some of the answers that I came up with. The answer to why creativity is so hot in business today is VUCA. We live in a VUCA moment, a moment of volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity, VUCA. And it's an unusual historical moment. We had a VUCA moment at the turn of the 19th century, and we're in the turn of another century, and we're there again. Now, most of historical time, you didn't expect to hear about historical time, but here it is. Most of historical time is spent slowly adjusting to 1 or 2 big technological changes or social changes over a period of many decades. But every once in a while, you have huge technological, demographic, social, global changes happening all at once. And the problems are ever-changing, and the solutions are open-ended. Indeed, the most important problem-solving capability that you can have at this moment in time is learning to identify the right problem and then selecting the best of many possible answers. And as we will see today, that is precisely what progressive education does. In fact, the blocks associated with progressive education are called open-ended materials. I just learned about that the other day. And they were called this 100 years ago? Open-ended materials. Sorry, it was stunning when I played with that. So startup entrepreneurialism, of course, is also about open-ended challenges and solutions. The twin streams of entrepreneurialism and progressive education now seem to be merging. And it's no accident that Amazon's Jeff Bezos and Google's Larry Page and Sergey Brin went to progressive education schools where they were taught, they learned, they expanded their creativity. So what is creativity anyhow? I recently wrote a book called Creative Intelligence, CQ, as an IQ, EQ, CQ. And in it, I define creativity as simply the making of the new that has value. Often, that originality, that new stuff, has economic value. Now, in stable times, making the same thing more efficiently squeezes out marginally economic value. But in VUCA times, making the new can generate huge economic value. And just look at the stock market valuations of Apple, Facebook, and Twitter, right? Let me tell you what creativity is not. Creativity is not rare. It's not about individual genius. And it's not about brainwaves. Creative skills and values can be taught, and we can all learn them. Creativity is mostly social. We do it in dyads and triads and teams, even as we connect the dots alone, taking that shower or running or spacing out over coffee. Above all, creativity is about knowing what is meaningful in culture and harnessing technology to amplify that meaning. Okay, I'm going to repeat that because I like that sentence. Above all, creativity is about knowing what is meaningful in culture and then harnessing the technologies to amplify that meaning for people. So where do we go to get more of this creativity? Well, you know, I teach graduate students and college students with colleagues like Ben Lee here sitting there. And we teach them how to boost their creativity right here at the New School. We do personal creativity mapping. We do design narratives. We do deep readings of Tanizaki and Csikszentmihalyi. And around the block, just around the block, City and Country, as we will see, is coaching children to do the same thing, to be more creative, to increase their creative capacities. And what goes on in City and Country classrooms is very similar to what happens in the best high-tech labs, or the smartest startups, or the hottest business development teams. These are all magic circles of creativity. For example, the era of wearable technology wasn't born with Google glasses on the West Coast, but just a few blocks from here at RGA, which developed Nike Plus in a creative process that mirrors what happens at City and Country. Okay? So whether it's MIT, Stanford, Parsons, City and Country, RGA, learning 4 or 5 or 6 creativity skills will boost your creative intelligence, your CQ. So I wanted to offer my version of these skills, these creative skills. They go by lots of names, but they're all very much quite similar. So the first skill, the first creative skill, is what I call knowledge mining. In a world of VUCA, the most important thing in business, I would say in life, is knowing what is meaningful to people. Not just their needs, but what Frank Knight, Chicago School economist, calls higher order wants. Now, you can mine for these higher order wants 2 ways. First, through immersion. We know about this, those 10,000 hours of study that makes you expert, but actually more importantly, shows you the deep patterns in a field. And once you know the deep patterns, you can also see what's new, what's not there, what's different, and helps you create the new. And I'm a birder. I'm out there in Central Park and in the Amazon and wherever I can find myself, birding. And I'm trained to look for the odd duck. It's not an anomaly for me. It's not unusual to find the odd duck. I'm looking for the odd duck. And I've put in my 10,000 hours in the field, and I'm always looking for what's not there. And when I saw a black swan in Singapore at their waste treatment dump, Singapore has one, I wasn't really surprised. I was delighted. It was my odd duck for the moment. The other way to mine for meaning is actually to mine ourselves, what we embody as a generation, a gender, a region, a nation, a religious group. If you look at the young entrepreneurs who have given us Facebook, Google, Airbnb, which was founded by a RISD grad, by the way, why are they successful? They've mined what is meaningful to their generation, the values, technology, and aspirations of their friends and family. How do you get Zipcar? It's pretty simple. You connect the dots of wanting a cheap ride, traditional value, a new value system of sharing, not owning, and some new online technology. Instagram, connect the dots of a value system of sharing to new technologies of easy picture taking and posting online. You can do this again and again for Spotify, Match.com. It's all rather simple. Mining what we ourselves embody as a group gets you to what is meaningful and generates a huge amount of entrepreneurialism. A second creative skill, and perhaps the most important, is framing and reframing. We frame our narratives, the stories of our lives, in different ways to different people. And we frame our social engagements, what's going on here, differently in different social mediums. How you present yourself and how you engage on Facebook is very different from what you do in a classroom, what you do with your parents, what you do with your children. And once you understand that you frame your narratives and you frame your engagements, you can reframe them. And reframing is a powerful force for innovation and creativity. To my 95-year-old mother, her birthday is in a couple of weeks, medicine is about disease and cures, and the doctor's at the center of all that. To me, medicine is about well-being and maximizing my abilities to do what I can at whatever age. And I'm at the center of my healthcare. Very different frames, a huge reframe with enormous consequences, both business and social. A third creative skill is play. Play is serious business. Entrepreneurs, scientists, jazz musicians, stand-up comedians, they all mess around. They use the process of play to generate the new. And what is that process of play? You follow a game with rules and constraints. You do it with people you trust, very important, people you trust. You succeed or fail in any number of ways. It's open-ended. You try and try again. You iterate. You role play. You improvise. Serious play is a 21st century creative skill. And so is making. Making is my fourth creative skill. Thanks to new low-cost social media systems like Kickstarter, digital tools from Apple, technologies like 3D printing, and global networks like Etsy and Amazon, each of us can now become makers again. And that's a glorious thing. And not only do we make things, we can now make businesses at a very low cost. The cost of being creative in America is plummeting, and that has huge consequences for all of us. And the final creative skill I call scaling. Taking creativity and scaling it to actual creation of things and services is really at the heart of economic value, of generating economic value. The skills of scaling are actually quite different from the skills of creativity, but to me they're all part of the same process. In my book I call the people who scale wanderers, but I don't like that anymore. They're really curators. You know, these are the general managers, the coaches, the teachers, the angel investors, the gallery owners, the bloggers, the people who decide what is truly creative for their circle and then provide the resources to make them real. Steve Jobs, Peggy Guggenheim, Misters Hewlett and Packard, Fred Wilson, Mark Pinney, all great curators of creativity who provide the resources to make them happen, to take them out of the lab, out of the theoretical into the real, and generate economic value. It's the heart of entrepreneurialism, it's the heart of startup capitalism. So now I'd like to show you a clip from City and Country that illustrates nearly all of these creative skills in action in the classroom. And for those of you in the audience who haven't actually been over to look what happens inside a progressive education classroom, I think this will blow you away. It blew me away when I saw it.
So we started first with the children thinking about their own experience as shoppers in their favorite stores and what made a good store. And then we went on field trips to visit stores. They interviewed store managers and looked at all that they needed to break down to start and run a business. And I used to run a branding and communications agency, which is in the neighborhood, and so we took them on a field trip, and they were the clients of my old agency, and we had a day-long brainstorm session to understand the purpose of the store. And so with that in mind, they worked on a motto for the store and a logo for the store.
You're each going to have these little stickies here, and you're going to write on each sticky a possible name for the store.
The process of brainstorming is so integral to all of the teaching at City and Country that it's a natural extension for them to do it when it comes to the store.
So can you tell me what the name is? The store? A little louder.
The orange highlighter.
And how did you guys come up with the name?
We came up with a lot of choices, and then we decided which ones we didn't really need, and then we came down to 3 choices: Big Ben, the orange highlighter, and Staples Junior, and then we voted with the whole entire grade, and the orange highlighter won.
The motto for Big Pen was "It's time for supplies." The motto for Staples Junior was "It's cute," and the motto for the orange highlighter was "Brighten Up."
So I'm responsible for teaching math to both 9s groups, and we're integrating that with the store curriculum. And there's an absolutely natural parallel.
That means 1 jug of paint costs how many dollars?
And so introduce the concepts of how do you gather data, how do you analyze data, what's the shape of data. And so they did that kind of in the math curriculum itself, and then we applied that to the store. They looked at how they ordered quantities and how they tally receipts.
You owe me $17.65.
$20.
I got it. $2.35.
I mean, what do you say to that? That's education, right? I mean, learning by doing. The classroom begins by going outside the classroom. The process that they go through which they learn their math. That process, I've been at IDEO, a consulting firm, going through processes for large corporations sitting in. This is as good as any. I mean, this whole group could set up their own consultancy tomorrow. Maybe they should. It's just, this is what happens. This is progressive education. And it's just marvelous. And you can see the connection between this and entrepreneurialism and creativity and innovation in how they learn, in how they're coached by their incredible teacher. I mean, she's just marvelous to lead them through this and to lead them through the learning. Okay. To the parents of all the children who are in this video, God bless. Fantastic. I'm going to end with a question that I'm frequently asked, and it's this. Is it, really, Bruce? It always gets to the end of the day and is it really, Bruce? Let's be honest. You really can't measure creativity, right? I mean, it's that artsy-fartsy kind of thing that you can't really measure it, and therefore it's not really serious, and therefore, for really serious business people, it's drapes, basically. They're trying to say that. And the answer is, no, you can measure creativity. You can assess creativity. And in fact, most of the best companies, the best schools, the best sports programs, and some of the worst TV reality shows, they assess creativity all the time, and pretty much in the same way. They do it through portfolio, through performance, and through expert juries. I call it the Juilliard School of Creativity Assessment. That's what they do at Juilliard. And the smartest companies, the most cutting-edge startups, They want to see what you can do and how you do it. And they want to see your portfolio of projects first, and then they want to see you actually perform. They call you in, and they put you together, usually with a team, and they have you work out a real problem. They're not really interested in the end result, although some of them are. They want to see how you play. They want to see how you act collaboratively, empathetically, okay? How you think, how you work a challenge with others in real time. And again, the outcome is always open-ended, and the result not really matters. They want to see serious play. And the judges, research shows that an expert jury in a specific field, it's always got to be within your field, does a great job of identifying excellence and exceptionalism. Whether it's Dancing with the Stars, the Olympics, or Google, you can assess creativity. But of course, first, you must value it. So thank you very much, and now I'd like to introduce my friend and mentor and the man who introduced me to Santa Fe, Tucker Wiemeister. Where is Tucker?
Thanks, Bruce, and thank you all for coming. And so I'm here to introduce David Rockwell and Lori Breslow. So what we decided is to take these four speakers and put them into two groups. One which is going to be sort of about the school side, and the other is about actually when they get to work. So to see like sort of the process and then the applications. So going from school to work, it's not that much different. Or working in the lab, or who knows what the future is going to be. So basically, I think that learning by doing and design thinking are the same thing. And that's what this symposium is really about. So now we're going to have a maker and a teacher. We have like David Rockwell and Lori, and but they both are teachers. They both are about learning. Everything is the same. So the playground is about learning, and the classroom is about play. At MIT, the engineers, it's an engineering school, but it's also MIT. So I thought I'd talk a little bit about the history, not going back to the cavemen, but with Socrates. So Socrates had a school, and basically it was about learning by thinking, or learning by arguing. A few years later, Froebel came along, and he started kindergarten. And basically, his idea was that the children were going to learn with hands-on learning. He made the Froebel blocks that the children played with and organized and learned about the order in the world and geometry and things like that. Then progressive education came along. And progressive education is about learning by doing, not just hands-on, but actually learning by doing things and trying things out for yourself. And we already heard about how Carolyn Pratt invented the unit blocks. And what's great about them is they're great for kids to use, but they're also like, they show geometry and mathematics. And then 100 years later, David Rockwell's doing it again. And so I'd like to introduce David Rockwell, who I had a lot of fun playing with.
Wow, well, it's amazing to see all these people thinking about this conversation on a Friday night here is kind of amazing. But I want to start by speaking out for the drapery people in the room, if there's anyone other than me. And just to say draperies are okay, I want to just start with that. So I am essentially a maker. I'm a designer, an architect. And I thought I would just start by talking just a little bit about personally how I got into design and what inspired me. And the truth of the matter is play in every form was a lifesaver for me, and it was a thing that propelled me forward. And early on, that's community theater in Deal, New Jersey, for any of you who don't recognize it. And that's a Rube Goldberg drawing. And the two things and this was living in Deal, New Jersey, in a very beautiful private suburb, but the things that appealed to me were the things that were about community. And those things were the community theater, and that's me, for those who don't recognize me, and building things. So I found that building was a way to communicate, was a way to create community, and I loved hearing the 4 C's, which I didn't, they're really the principles of my studio and my business. But design and making, I thought, was the best possible way to engage in the world. Had an amazing experience at age 12, and I went to see my first Broadway show. It was Fiddler on the Roof. That's an image of Boris Aronson's design of it. And at the bottom right is a model. They were reviving Fiddler on the Roof about 8 years ago, and I was asked to design it. And I knew the widow of the man who had designed Boris Aronson's seminal Broadway show. And I said, God, I'm so nervous. Should I do this? And she looked at me. She said, worst comes to worst, it'll be awful. So you should just do it. So I had the advantage of doing it, and then another director took over, and I never had to experience it being awful or not awful. I didn't know anything about the Jewish slums. I didn't know about Boris Aronson. I knew I was in a room with 1,300 people that became a community through storytelling and music, and I knew that that intrigued me. We then moved sort of suddenly to Guadalajara, Mexico, and everything I loved about community theater and making was what the city was about. It was one big inhabitable playground. The marketplaces, the bull rings. So this kind of rattled around in my head, and I went to architecture school to Syracuse University, and I brought a little hammock with me just so I would feel at home. And I'll tell you, as I got farther and farther into design, I realized that what particularly interested me wasn't the design of any one building, but it was the community-driven experience that links buildings. So I thought about buildings from the inside out, and about 30 years ago, we established Rockwell Group. We're on Union Square. We're about 150 makers, designers, filmmakers, architects, writers. Some of the people, I'm not sure what they do. But it is project-based learning. And I established the studio with one key principle, and that was our driving ideas were going to be curiosity and asking the question, what if? So there were very few no's as we started to establish our studio, and we've been lucky to do the kinds of work I wanted to do that I never dreamed of being possible. Largely hospitality, lots of restaurants, lots of hotels. But I want to focus the discussion on this playground we were privileged to create in the context, in the frame, as Bruce said, of someone who had spent his life being enabled by the ability and the drive and the obsession to make and create. So we developed this playground, and it came out of, in fact, post 9/11, we were invited by PS 234 when they moved to 13th Street, and the principal, Anna Switzer, said, David, maybe you can come, this was 3 or 4 days post 9/11, maybe you could help make the school less depressing and less scary for these kids since they're moving, they had to evacuate. We lived in Tribeca. I had a studio of 150 designers who felt totally impotent, and of course, creating restaurants and hotels seemed unnecessary, and so this was a kind of interesting moment. So I went to the school, and I brought in Myra Kalman, Tom Otterness, 30 people from our studio, and it was a kind of urban barn raising. And we transformed this school, and in the process, And this happened in about a week. And in that process, I connected with a kind of public-private partnership I never dreamed possible. We were then contacted right after that by New York City, NYC and Company, because they were looking to create a viewing platform at Ground Zero, largely for visiting dignitaries. I went down there with 2 or 3 other architects. We put together a group and we looked at it and we said, we really don't want to do that. But we would create a public viewing platform, primarily because there had been so much speculation and so many architects talking about how it should be rebuilt before anyone had had a chance to have a really unmediated look at what happened. And we thought what needed to happen was a place to pay respects, to have a kind of very direct experience. The city responded, that's a great idea, but to do that, it has to be privately funded. And being somewhat naive, this small group of architects, we raised $500,000 and built this in about 100 days. So that was, for me, a life-changing experience in terms of understanding what private partnership could be and understanding as a creative individual you can be proactive. And so just like as a kid I was compelled by community theater because it was people coming together, this connected me to a kind of idea that I wanted to continue, and the foundation that we established started pursuing other things. This was a cultural center on Fulton Street that we spent 2 years working on, 2002, 2003, called the Incubator. Amazing participation from the Public Art Fund, the Public Theater, Naked Angels, Labyrinth, the Old Vic in London. And it just turned out after 2 or 3 years, we could not get city, federal, state government to agree on, and there's still ongoing discussions. Our idea was creating new works for visual and performing artists in downtown Manhattan, which is a topic for another conversation, but visual and performing artists said they wanted to work together till they started negotiating who was going to get more space. Then it was a slightly... So in a moment of frustration, I said to someone who worked with me, what I should have done is just created a playground for the city. J Street Pier, which is now Pier 25, was taken out of commission. I have an 11-year-old, 14-year-old, 11-year-old, and a 14-year-old, and I had had a lot of thoughts about play. I thought about my early experiences playing, and so this person named Mark Hacker, who's here and works with me, said, what would your playground look like? So I started to sketch, and like most architects, I did hundreds of drawings showing exactly how everyone should play, and these obsessed. And as I started to put together a coalition, I started to research adventure playgrounds, which were in the 1930s in Europe, really places of community coming together and making. Looked at adventure playgrounds now in Europe, and in fact brought over a woman named Penny Wilson, who is sort of the Mary Poppins of adventure playgrounds in London and manages 14 of them. I certainly was compelled by block play, as has been discussed here, for a couple reasons. I not only thought they were a fascinating way to learn, and there was a deep history of blocks as learning, but I started to think about scaling them up, and they, in some ways, could go back to my interest in building Rube Goldberg contraptions, and they could connect you to building community. The fact that my 2 kids, those are not my kids, but the fact that my kids were teaching me that the box the thing came in was more fun than the thing was compelling. We studied everything we could about playgrounds. I don't know how many of you know this, but this was in Riverside Park, a playground that Noguchi and Louis Kahn had planned that was sort of extraordinary sculpted landscape, and they couldn't get it approved. And as I got into it, I understood all the obstacles in play. The things needed all kinds of approvals. There was, I feel, almost a systematic engineering out of creative risk in play. And so this was a 5-year self-funded research project. We approached the city, it was then Adrian Benepe, and said, we have an idea for a playground. And was an incredible response where he said, I'd love to come see it. We had done play dates with various schools. We had large blocks we had made. And so we proposed creating a playground that had loose parts, blocks, malleable elements, sand and water, and play associates, which was critical for a public playground in New York because loose parts become souvenirs if there's not someone to manage it. And we started to think about, and that of course was a real lightning rod for many parents, that they were going to be overmanaged. And so we brought in people from CUNY and Sarah Lawrence, and we all of a sudden had this huge group of interested parties collaborating on this. And in 2010, we opened Imagination Playground in the Seaport. Kind of an extraordinary adventure for me. And you can see that it is multi-level. It creates a kind of landscape. It has about 75 different kinds of blocks. It has a small building where the blocks live. It has both sand and water. We're now doing a second playground for the city, also pro bono, in Betsy Head in Brownsville, a very underserved neighborhood. And we're converting what is a kind of asphalt rectangle, keeping these beautiful London plane trees and weaving the park around it, including this. In this case, we're developing a kind of second-story treehouse piece, as well as many other smaller pieces we're adding. The city, a year before the playground opened up, said, why don't we do a play date with just the loose parts? So we created this box. We brought them out to Brownsville, and it was an extraordinary hit. Kids wanted to play longer and deeper. And so the city partnered with us and acquired 10 Playground in a Box, which we've now engineered to be much lighter, much more portable, biodegradable, all made in the US. And in the time since we began, there are now 850 playgrounds in the world on every continent but Antarctica. And this is filming some of the early play dates. And most recently, we partnered with UNICEF through the generosity of Disney, and there's 40 playgrounds in Haiti and in Bangladesh, and it's incredible. We're now looking at other developed ideas, including the Building Museum, where a year ago we opened an exhibit that is a history of, so we curated looking at their history of amazing toys and blocks and essentially building sets. And we created, through our technology lab, an interactive. So there's large-scale blocks, there's smaller blocks, there's a block area, and actually attendance is so successful they're going to do it another year. And quickly, since I'm getting the hurry-up clock, I just want to say that I do believe that the instinct to play and the instinct to learn and create are the same. And I want to show 3 projects we're doing right now that are not for kids, it's for grown-up play. And this is a 1,200-seat pop-up, all-wooden structure that we're assembling in 4.5 days for the TED conference in Vancouver in March. And it came out of a whole series of things, but just thinking about connection and play, TED had grown from being a smaller, intimate conference to a much bigger conference. They're moving to Vancouver. So this is a wooden structure designed around how you might want to be in a conference. There's 10 different ways to sit. There's ringside seats. There's beanbag chairs. There's places to stand in the back where you can blog and not annoy people. And it's 84 feet from the center of the stage to the farthest seat. So it's incredibly intimate, and it focuses everything. And of course, a conference is not about what happens on stage. It's about what happens with the rest of the audience. So it is play. We've evolved into doing theater, which links back to my earliest interest in community theater. And that's just insane amounts of fun. It should almost be illegal. And this is the set for Kinky Boots that has these small conveyor belts that actually become part of the show. And This is for Cornell Tech. While the campus is being built, they're on the 3rd floor of the Google building. And we've created classrooms for them that are imagination playground in a box for Cornell Tech. And these pieces move and change throughout the day as they're used for presentations, development, and when they have to change floors, this can all pack up and move. And I want to show one last project called Neue House on 25th Street, which is play for, it's a hard project to describe, but it's a membership club that is all about creativity. So you can lease a desk, you can lease an office, there's a screening room, and the cafe are 5 food carts that move around, and it's about creating a creative culture that is not that different from Imagination Playground, just for older kids. So I really do think that, you know, from a point of view of how to develop creatively, it's about finding the thing that's, in my case, was most important to me in developing that. And as I see my kids growing up, I think finding those things in them, and even as we build a studio, we want to bring everyone's own idiosyncrasies or their creativity, because I think that's the way you're able to develop work. Thank you very much.
So I'm the director, is this working? Yes. I'm the director of something called the Teaching and Learning Laboratory at MIT. But actually, I'm not here because of that. I'm here because I am the aunt of a city and country, he's getting his head rubbed right now, a city and country alum who started Kate and the 2s and went to the 13s. So you know that I'm legitimate because I'm using the lingo. I've been asked to come. We used to come down all the time to see Nate, we being my husband. My husband is a physics professor at MIT who in the last third of his career has decided that he wanted to do physics education and physics education research. And we would come down to New York to see Nate and, oh, by the way, my sister and brother-in-law and mother. And Nate would tell us what he was doing. Building Brooklyn Bridges, he was in a play, he was in drag. I believe you were pregnant, right, at one point? And John and I would say, you know, that's exactly what we're trying to do at MIT. Well, not the part about the students in drag, although maybe they are, but that kind of learning by doing, that kind of project-based learning, all those terms have been used, is what we're trying to do at MIT. So I'm here to talk a little bit, yes, about some of the things we're doing at MIT, but also, as David said, to bring the message that even in higher education, we are trying to use the philosophy and practices of progressive education. We don't call it that necessarily, but as I've learned from Nate, that's exactly what we are doing. And I should say, and I think some of the people who are involved in progressive education in the K through 12 world know this as well, is that it is very hard work. There is a lot of rhetoric. I was just in Washington, D.C., sort of testifying in front of a White House committee about trying to improve what's called STEM education. STEM stands for science, technology, engineering, and math. They used to call it SMET till somebody figured out that if they changed the letters around, they could do STEM. Oops. Oh my goodness, am I all the way? There we go. And so there's a lot of talk in a lot of quarters about doing this kind of work in higher education, but in fact, it is not easy, as I'm sure it's not easy for the people who are trying to do it in K through 12. Those are some of the skills that we are trying to bring to the MIT undergraduates, and if you look at them, they're exactly the things that have been talked about tonight. this is what the classroom used to look like at MIT, and I'm really surprised there's one woman or two women actually, because that was not usual in times like this. And this is what it looks like now to take freshman physics. So back in 2000, my husband was the architect of something called the TEAL Project, Technology-Enabled Active Learning, and it completely turned physics on its head. So instead of what we've been doing tonight, which is mostly standing up here and talking at you, the students actually do things during freshman physics in a room that's been especially created so that they can sit not like you're sitting right now, but actually at tables and do things. And so that's a still shot. I would like to show you just a 10-second clip of what happens in physics, freshman physics at MIT.
Divided by our outer squared minus our inner squared.
Oh, and you count, because you do the difference of squares and cancel those out.
That's it.
Wow.
Okay.
And the reason I show that is not so you can learn that r squared plus r minus 2 or whatever equals whatever, but rather because you heard that young man say, wow. And that, to me, is learning, and that, to me, is creativity. And that's what we're trying to do, some of us, at MIT. So I thought I'd give you just 3 quick other examples of things that we're doing at the Institute, as we call it. I don't know if you can see all the way in the back, but there is a grid with numbers. And math is very abstract, and it's very hard, and what these students are trying to do is to take those numbers and actually make them real for them by working with things that they are doing with their hands. MIT has a wind tunnel, and the students often don't get to actually use it because the faculty are using it, so these students decided that they were going to create their own wind tunnel and do the kinds of experiments that help us to understand, for example, how planes fly. I think it was Tucker who said to me, hey, wait a minute, don't they do fancy cars at MIT? How come you don't have a picture of that? So that is the solar electrical vehicle that was raced in Australia. I think we came in second. I have no idea how it works, but doesn't it look really cool? I would really like that car. And then this is my favorite. So there's a very famous course at MIT. Everything in MIT, as you can imagine, is numbers. So the course is 2009, for those of you who are thinking about going to MIT. 2 is mechanical engineering. That's the department. And 009 is a course where students work in teams, and they begin with an idea, and they end up with a prototype at the end, and they have to do it, again, we're doing right now. They have a big auditorium, and they have to present their ideas to the auditorium. This particular group of students at the end of the semester had created something called Equitemp. Now, I didn't know this, but evidently, if you make a horse run before it is warmed up, it's very dangerous for the horse. And so what they've done is, and you can see, I think, the woman bending down by the horse's leg, she's putting a cuff, the Equitemp cuff, on the horse. And what that does is it automatically tells the rider, who is wearing a little sort of wristwatch, what the body temperature of the horse is, so the rider knows when the horse can start galloping and doesn't put the horse in any kind of distress. Now, I think that's a pretty wonderful invention, but the reason that I show you this is because I think it was even more of a problem-solving example to get the damn horse into the auditorium. I can't imagine what negotiations, we haven't talked about negotiation as being a skill, but it's an important one. I can't imagine what negotiations they had to go through to get the horse. And again, I'm not sure in the back you can see this, but there's kind of a rubber pad under the horse, so they even thought about what they needed in case Pinky got very anxious, as she, I think, was demonstrating equitemp. So these are the kinds of things that we're doing at MIT. The question for this whole evening is, can creativity be taught? I don't want either Tucker or Eric to fall over right now, but I think that the answer is no. But I do think that what you can do, and what City and Country has done, and what we're trying to do in higher education, is to set up the environment, is to set up the climate, is to set up the right circumstances that creativity can flourish. And that's why I'm so glad that I've been invited to be part of the panel and am Nate's aunt.
Okay. Well, first of all, I just want to say thank you. Incredible to see so many people here tonight, especially on a Friday in New York City. I think the progressive education trumps all other potential activities in New York City on Friday is pretty good. So I'm Eric Freitag. Amongst other things, I'm probably best known for having two kids that are groomed on progressive education. Both my son and daughter started at City and Country when they're 2. My daughter is now in the 12s, so that's 10 years of progressive education training, which is pretty impressive. And I also want to just say that it's been great to be part of the symposium. And one of the things that's been a real pleasure is actually talking to so many of the thought leaders, kind of the highlights of which are here tonight. And one thing that I found was there are a lot of people that use a lot of terminology, as you can imagine. And I picked up a couple terms that I wanted to kind of share with you, describe my own way, and share an anecdote or two. So the first one, oh, by the way, disclaimer here, these statements are made up by me. So if they happen to paraphrase anybody a lot smarter than me, that's purely by accident. So, quote me at your own risk. But creativity is this idea of some form of applied thinking. Reminds me of when I was an undergraduate at UC Berkeley in the engineering department, similar to MIT. In some ways. And they talked about engineering as applied science. And this idea of applied always stuck with me, that you're applying some knowledge or skill. So if you think about creativity as applied thinking, I need to develop the skill of thinking and then apply it in certain kind of ways. And here we are in terms of creativity. And one of the best classes I ever took at university was this kind of inventive class out of the business school. It was part of the Entrepreneurship program. It was a joint venture between the business students, the engineering students, and the design students who were all kind of thrown together in kind of a mosh pit. And we were asked at the end of the year to deliver something, it could be anything, that we would present in kind of a trade show format. And it was the first time I'd ever been exposed to this kind of idea of multiple disciplines, not just engineers, coming at the same problem from different angles and kind of negotiate through it to come up with a great solution. So I'm proud to say that the solution that we came up with which was a thermostat that used real-time weather data to predict tomorrow's temperature, is actually in the marketplace. And that's 25 years ago before the internet. So, lots of good things can happen. It definitely changed my life in terms of my perspective, and I can say that I do a lot of this kind of multidisciplinary work today. The next term that came up over and over is this idea of innovation. And at least from my perspective, it's kind of those moments when you sit there and you look at something kind of brilliant, and you think, boy, wow, why didn't somebody, usually me, why didn't I think of that before? And the part of this is kind of hidden that most people don't realize is that innovation happens kind of in the environment of a lot of kind of protest. There's a lot of people that say, no, you can't do that. You should never try that. And for people who are innovative, and I don't know whether it's courage or kind of stupidity, I guess, if you want to call it that. But there's something about people who are willing to take risks and do things that other people say they can't do that allows you to be innovative. And that's actually a skill. You develop a comfort to allow yourself to go in these kind of weird environments and say, why don't we try this? And great things happen. But again, that's a skill you can develop. Third word is collaboration. And I think we've talked about this a lot tonight. And when I've had the opportunity to join my kids in the City and Country School, and help them with different projects. And this idea of trying to describe collaboration to a 5-year-old or a 7-year-old, I kind of try to put it in these terms of kind of when everyone feels like they've contributed, but no one knows or actually really cares whose idea it was. And when those things happen, you get real collaboration. So Tucker and I had an opportunity to be involved in City and Country's famous Brooklyn Bridge project. So this is a study that goes on for several months. They study everything about the Brooklyn Bridge, the history, the mechanics, the social, economic version of it. And the result out of a group effort, in this case, was a 16-foot suspension bridge built out of the unit blocks and rope and everything. And this is a real suspension bridge. So we didn't mess around. Not that I knew anything about making suspension bridges, but we figured out, and the key turns out to be the anchors. So these kids together mixed and poured 450 pounds of concrete in order to establish these anchors, and that center section is actually completely suspended. It's not attached to either side, which is pretty remarkable. And if you ask any of these kids about the collaboration, they don't really care who did what. They just smile because they know this is one of maybe 5 times in 100 years they actually made a real suspension bridge. So kind of a proud moment for both parent and kids. The next term is this idea of entrepreneurship. And for me, it's that crosshairs of business and creativity. And what's interesting about my job, my career, I'm actually currently I'm the director of product innovation at RGA. I think Bruce mentioned that earlier. Previously, I was the director of engineering services at a company called Smart Design. So these are design consultancies. And within that environment, my colleagues, who are the creatives, I'm the business guy. I'm the guy who is kind of, formal, I'm client-facing, I'm worried about project plans and schedules and budgets and what have you. But amongst my clients, who are typically Fortune 500 companies, I'm the creative guy, right? So I'm the guy they come to with these really complex problems, looking for some kind of out-of-the-box thinking. And so it's very interesting to be at that crosshairs. And when people ask me, well, where did you get those skills, because it's a very unusual skill set, and it's even more and more important today in business. People are looking for people with this kind of background. I don't really know. I was kind of a kid who went to a traditional kind of public education. I learned how to, kind of study for tests, if you will. And I say I actually learned by just doing it over the years. I've learned through my experience, which leads me to the last phrase, is this idea of progressive education. And it reminds me of a moment when my wife and I were in undergraduate school. We met in college. My wife, Jill Weinstock's actually the better half, and she's a practicing artist, and she's the director of education at the Children's Museum of Art, so she's a pretty creative person. But she was watching me cram for a test one night. It was like, 1 o'clock in the morning. She's like, "What are you doing?" And and she says, "Well, how do you learn anything, studying that way?" And I said, "What do you mean, how do I learn anything? I'm studying for this test." And she's like, "Well, what you're really doing is just memorizing, right? You're just memorizing for the test," which I was pretty good at. I realized I learned how to memorize. My education was learning how to memorize to take a test. So I said, "Well, how do you learn?" And she says, "Well, I learned how to learn. And when you learn, you gain knowledge. And if you have knowledge, then you'll do fine on the test." So it always stuck with me. And so I realized that I've learned how to learn by doing, and that is the core of progression. The beautiful thing about it is if you learn that skill, it lasts a lifetime. It doesn't stop. You can keep doing it over and over again. So with that, as my take on progressive education and all the benefits of it, I'd like to introduce 2 fabulous individuals. First of all is Charles Adler, who's a co-founder and head of design for Kickstarter, a great guy. And then later we'll have Mark Pinney, who is the chief financial officer of Vimeo, who I don't have the slide yet, but I'll get there in a second, who also, by the way, had 3 kids go through the City and Country program from 2 all the way to 13. So with that, Charles.
Hello. So I'm not really going to talk about the work that I've done. I'm not really going to talk too much about Kickstarter, although maybe there's like 3 slides in there. Can't help it. Actually, former head of design, so I'm no longer at the company. What I am going to talk a little bit about is really through the lens of 3 stories that have gone on in my past, in my life. One being story of my life, kind of reflection of that, how that's made me who I am today, maybe, I don't know. And one is a story, say, that includes my daughter Phoebe, and my lens and reflection of my own life in order to give her something, perhaps something different, something more, something that I didn't have. And then last, through the lens of some pretty unique kids who ran a pretty impressive Kickstarter project. So Eric posed this statement of courage, which is what I'm going to talk a bit about, or try to talk about, and yet mentioned as well this term stupidity, which I take to heart, because I think in those moments when you are courageous, you never think you're courageous. You're probably thinking more that you're stupid to go down this path that everyone's telling you not to go down. It's only in reflection that you can say, yes, I was courageous. And so with that, I'll start by saying that I'm afraid of heights, so this has some meaning. Tucker's going to be a little disappointed. This isn't me. He was always hoping that was me. So I want to talk a little bit about courage, and to illustrate that, these three stories that I mentioned. So I was a pretty normal kid growing up. As a boy, as a guy, as a kid, I was a tinker. I played with Legos, with construction, with blocks, made sand castles, snow castles, and then broke them all, right? So make and deconstruct. I was in an adventure. I loved the outdoors. I loved being out in the woods and exploring the world around me, and as well building through, in this case, the Boy Scouts. I was a misguided high school graduate. I don't know how I got out of school, but they let me out. I was a bad student. Oops, let's go back one. I wasn't a great student. I didn't work well in this sort of formal education system, and much like Eric, I went to public school. And there was a sort of, in that time, I knew exactly what I wanted to do with my life. I wanted to be an architect. I didn't become one. We can talk a little bit more about that later. But I had very set goals as to what I wanted to be. I just didn't know how to get there. And the school that I was in didn't really understand what it meant to be an architect either, and didn't know where to send me. Interestingly enough, I went to engineering school in the Midwest. I grew up out here and ended up in the Midwest as a way, an opportunity to sort of distance myself from my parents, discover myself, run away, supposedly. And in here, you see that I dropped out of school, and I think about that quite a bit. And I think in reflection of this whole conversation and the conversation around progressive education and education in general, what led me to that point? And we'll come back to that. Went to engineering school. Well, I went professionally. When I dropped out, I became a designer. So I've now shifted my mindset 3 different times. I sort of changed course from an architect to an engineer to a designer. Now maybe there's a thread of continuity there, but it's hard. It's a bit of a stretch. Now I've got this term or this moniker called entrepreneur because I've started a company called Kickstarter. I've done a few things prior to that, and then I guess tonight I'm a speaker. Still figuring that out. But what interests me is this fact that at some point I dropped out of school. And it's not so much the act that I dropped out or why I dropped out. That's sort of beside the point. But what led to that point? What were some of the things that, perhaps failures, if you want to call them, that led to that decision? And I think part of it was, as I mentioned earlier, I grew up out here and I ran away to the Midwest, studying in engineering, and realized at some point that wasn't quite what I wanted to do. But again, much like high school, I didn't do very well. And I think one of the things that I recognized very late, aka this morning, was that one of those things that happened to me in high school, when I wasn't doing well, my parents stepped in. And maybe stepped in a little bit too much, created too much of a safety net for me. And so when I went out into the Midwest to go discover myself and presumably go to school, I probably faltered more and more. And I realized I wasn't a good student. I realized I was a good worker. The internet happened, and so that became a thing. That's where I became a designer. So it gave me this unique opportunity to kind of go get out and explore this whole new thing. I don't know what I would have done if I hadn't dropped out. I don't know what I would be doing now if the internet didn't happen. But that's another conversation. So I'm going to talk about my daughter. This is my little nearly 5-year-old daughter. And it's been amazing watching her grow up and thinking about the childhood that I had, how I played, and now turned 40 last week, so I forget a little bit about what it was like to be a kid sometimes, and I see it through her. And one of the things that fascinates me most of all in watching her grow up and develop from when she's walking and crawling and just learning how to talk and then learning how to socially interact, which I think we're all trying to figure out, is that she's constantly trying to explore the world naturally. I don't have to tell her to go learn something. She's learning constantly. She's learning interaction with her little dollies, and she's learning how to read by reciting the things that I read to her and sitting alone and reciting those books. And it fascinates me. My wife and I sort of chuckle as we hear her singing or reading her stories to her dollies. And then we were posed with this situation in which we just recently moved back to Chicago. And when you make a shift like that, you've then got to figure out where your child is going to go to school. And we looked at a number of different schools in our area in Chicago. And this one school that teaches in sort of a progressive manner, it's a Montessori school, we'd gone on a tour. And there was this moment when the administrator was walking us through, much like I did today at CNC, and I had sort of the very same reflections, and we were talking a bit about the continuity between the two. And there was this moment where I was like, damn it, this is where I wish I went to school. Who could I have been? What sort of utilities would I have myself? How could I have gone through those tough struggles, those moments, say, those challenging times in my life when I was struggling through high school or struggling through college? And how could I have been more resilient in those moments and dug in deeper and challenged myself in different ways or discovered the world on my own? And so I think to myself now, my daughter is in this school, and I'm curious to see where this goes. This is sort of a social experiment for me and her. I think it'll be all right. And it's one of those moments where I just wonder, when we're talking about our kids, when we're talking about ourselves, how do we arm ourselves for the future us? And so that's a bit of what I'm thinking about with my daughter. The last piece, and I think this is pretty courageous. Again, they probably think they're stupid, but I think they're pretty brilliant. These are five kids. They're 5 high school students, and they ran a Kickstarter project a couple of years ago. We'll talk about that in a moment. The more important thing outside of the Kickstarter project is what they were doing, and you can see what they're sitting in here. They wanted to build this thing called the Viper. And mind you, these are teenagers. These are kids that probably spend more time picking their nose and popping zits and thinking about girls, perhaps. Or maybe they should be, I don't know. But they're building a flight simulator instead. Now, I don't know about you, but I couldn't in my wildest dreams build a flight simulator. And watching the video when they're talking about what they're working on, you don't see the parents or the mentors that are sort of behind the scenes with this thing. You see the kids actually talking about the mechanics of what they're putting together, the gyroscope, and the kid in the middle who's got this pretty intense stare. I believe he's the kid who's doing the graphics of the interface for the pop-up display, and he's just so into it. And it's amazing to see how into it he is and how intelligent he is and what grasp he has on this, and the fact that he's just excited that he gets to do it. And I think what that leads to, just as a little fun note, and what was inspiring for me, even in just watching this, is this ability for me to be my younger self at one point. That kid that I was never able to either get the gusto or the courage to become. I get to allow these kids, grease these kids' wheels a little bit to become the person perhaps that I would have liked to have been. Give them that opportunity. So these kids were amazing. They inspired 383 people. And ended up raising just shy of $12,000 when all they wanted to make this thing was $2,500. I think that's pretty incredible. So back to courage and this cliff, and I think in each of these different stories there are these moments where we're challenged, right? And in the face of challenge, how do we get through challenge? And what are the things that we use, or the tools that we use at our disposal at that moment, that crisis, when we're trying to make this tough decision? What are the utilities that we have in our tool belt? And the last thing I'm gonna leave with here, just before we get into the panel, is this other reflection, this reality that the cliff only seems steep before you take that leap. And what I've realized over time, and I think this speaks very much to what I saw today at City and Country, and in general, is this sense of community. And what I realized at the other side of the jump, the other side of the leap, is it feels something a little bit more akin to this, which is kind of playfully dangling at the edge of something that's really quite not so scary and just feels like a kid jumping off of a sidewalk. And what I mean by that is every time I shifted, when I quit my job and started my first studio, when I dropped my studio and started Kickstarter, there were always these moments that there was this black abyss at the other end that I didn't know what was going to happen. But the support that I had at the other end, when you take that risk, is pretty incredible. Much like those kids building the Viper. They got 383 people to support them. And if we think about how we can create community and create trust in one another to then foster more courage of our next generation or ourselves, I think that's pretty amazing. So next is Mark.
Yes, it's true. I'm the proud dad of 3 kids who graduated from City and Country, 2 of whom are here tonight. I hope paying close attention, keeping me honest, making sure my representations about their school is accurate. I want to bring a business perspective to this discussion, if I might, in this increasingly competitive and technology-oriented world. And let's move to a quote from Mary Meeker. Mary is one of the world's most respected technology analysts. She works at a venture capital firm called Kleiner Perkins. And she says, this cycle of technology disruption is materially faster and broader than prior cycles. So any of you in the audience here are already feeling overwhelmed by the pace that technology is developing. You haven't seen anything yet at this point. Let's assume that we buy, for the moment, the notion that progressive education begets creativity. And Laurie may make the argument that, in fact, it cannot be taught, but at least progressive education does create this vessel through which, I would argue, creativity can be formed and can be learned in some respects. So the question I want to talk about is, does creativity, in fact, beget success in today's business world? And I'm making, I think, the strong argument that that is indeed the case, and it's where we find ourselves at this point. I earnestly believe that in this market, businesses today thrive on creative people. And I'm really defining creative people as those who think on their feet, and you've heard this before, have a point of view, who look at issues from multiple angles, who know how to problem solve, who want to collaborate, and who can lead, and at the same time, build consensus. I've been in the technology space for about 20 years at this point, working and building value around companies in life science, digital media, e-commerce, advertising technologies. In all of the companies, whenever we look to bring people on, we always look to their creative attributes above all else. Is that any different from more traditional companies? I would argue less and less, quite frankly, because even, quote, normal companies are increasingly reliant now on emerging technologies. So let's take a look, as an example, of a list of media companies, right? And I've just simply characterized these as old media, names that you've, like television networks, names you've heard of before, where these are colored in blue, and then other companies, including, quite frankly, names like Apple and Microsoft. What are they doing on this list? Well, they too, frankly, are deeply invested in building sort of streaming media businesses. But the point is here, without sort of passing through each one of these names, the point is there's some very young companies here that are emerging now in terms of market capitalization, and you can see how it's sorted. Google, as an example, is about 15 years old, pushing 400 billion of market value. ExxonMobil, I think, is something like 430 billion. So the point is, if any of these, quote, new media companies are in any way a proxy for entrepreneurship, then I think you'll buy the argument that now entrepreneurship is very much mainstream and integrated into common business practices. So the conclusion here, I would argue, businesses do recognize the need for flexible and inventive capabilities, for management teams that are comfortable with ambiguity, who can think creatively, behave flexibly, and indeed creativity, in my view, is embraced by the business world today. Let's move to a quick piece on my company. I'm the Chief Financial Officer of this company called Vimeo. It's owned by Barry Diller's Interactive Corp. I'm happy to report as of like 3 months ago, we were at 120 million uniques that visited Vimeo.com every single month. ComScore data as of a couple of days ago shows it at about 150 million. And we had a great piece in Business Week, thank you very much, this last issue. So go take a read. It's a company that's going like a weed. You can see we have a creative platform business where filmmakers can basically buy storage and play services, and then the audience side where viewers can come and watch video. We have great aspirations for this company, and frankly, somewhat audaciously believe we're competing now with Dropbox on the subscription side and with Netflix on the viewer side. And I use the word audacious because I think it's very pertinent to the theme of the discussion tonight. I would contend the power of progressive education can imbue graduates with a degree of self-reliance such that they can go on audaciously to conceive of new business models or strategies that may never have existed before. In other words, to find the personal confidence to come up with the next Vimeo. Taking the step into the future, placing your marker, building your business is an audacious move. It requires great creativity on the part of the entrepreneur and the management team. Seems to me, if you can figure out how to build a model of the Brooklyn Bridge using wooden blocks at the age of 7, run a store at the age of 9, a newspaper at 13, you may indeed be qualified to start a business at the age of 21. So if you'd bear with me, let me walk you through a personal anecdote that I think exemplifies connecting progressive education with entrepreneurship and success in business. If you could move to the next slide there. So after business school, I followed the fairly predictable path into management consulting and then into investment banking. And frankly, it took a car wreck to compel me to consider where my passions lay and got me started on developing domain knowledge and expertise around the internet and its possibilities. And the investment thesis I stumbled upon here centered on assembling the right people, the right technologies, and the right investment capital to build enterprises that fit the emerging model for internet-enabled businesses. And these typically have 3 different components. Number 1, the business idea has to be disruptive to existing models. Number 2, the business has to be product-centric in that everything, the managers are completely fixated by providing a successful customer experience. And third, it has to be scalable, whereby the idea can proliferate both nationally and globally very, very quickly. In working with entrepreneurs, it became pretty clear to me that to be successful, entrepreneurs needed to know themselves really quite well. After all, building a business can be a pretty lonely existence. So take a look at the chart here. Some of the attributes you might expect to see on the left-hand side, confidence, no surprise, vision for the company, great powers of persuasion, not being reliant on authority figures, not listening to naysayers, having great deep domain expertise, and so forth and so on. Great communication, ability to build a management team, raise capital, and execute against plan brilliantly, right? Notice the overlap then between the success factors I have mentioned required by the entrepreneur and those emanating from progressive education. I've already been through this list. This is a list that mirrors my definition of creative people, quite frankly. No surprise, ability to think on your feet, have a point of view, solve problems, look at issues from multiple angles, communicate exceptionally well, collaborate, you've heard these C words before, right? And provide great leadership. So, it's no surprise. Give me a kid who has thrived in progressive education, and I will show you someone with the traits of the entrepreneur. So one last point, if you indulge me before we close here on the next slide. It's a sobering point, and it concerns today's employment picture. And forgive me, I have to indulge us in some economic theory in order to make the point. You know that the US economy is primarily driven by the services sector. And that sector is now under pressure from the twin forces of automation and globalization. You also probably know that internet technologies are super efficient, with technology companies able to do much, much more with many fewer people. What does this mean? Extreme pressure on wages and an unprecedented wage inequality between the top and everybody else. So look at the chart for a moment. This shows average household income tracking gross domestic product growth. It's the dotted line that's going up and to the right. But then look at the median family income that is detaching from this trend line in about 1980 and growing much slower thereafter. The only way for the average income to grow faster than the median income is for the high end of the distribution to grow faster, which is exactly what we're seeing today. Right? Why am I telling you this? Frankly, kids need to be ready for this phenomenon. There are not going to be too many comfortable middle-class jobs available in the future. And my argument is the best way to mitigate this risk is to develop your creative intelligence. Thank you, Bruce, for this definition. Developing the entrepreneurial muscle, in my view, is the best insurance against the traditional jobs going away. So I hope I persuaded you that creativity does beget in some form success in today's business world. I think businesses have to leverage creative and flexible management teams that can thrive in uncertain and volatile markets. I think the right place to find these people is amongst those who've grown up within the family of progressive education. So finally, to close, let me walk you through a citation I found on the City and Country website. This is a description of the fours now. And listen closely to the parallels between what happens in this class and what happens in the business office, right? I'm talking about 4-year-olds. Some of the trickiest problems we solve are with each other. While the fours are ready to work together, collaboration can often be challenging. It requires leadership, accepting compromise, and honoring the contributions of others. So skills taught to 4-year-olds in City and Country live on into our adulthood and into our business successes. The creativity that is learned and the power of progressive education are real and tangible throughout our lives. Thank you.
You know, the current issue of the Harvard Business Review has a big piece on Netflix and IDEO and another company, I can't remember, maybe it's RGA, talking about how you create a creative culture. And the language is almost virtually the same as that. Which means that 4-year-olds are learning that culture at City and Country, and corporations are reading Harvard Business Review to learn how to do it themselves. It's totally fascinating and mind-boggling, frankly. One of the things that I'd never really connected, actually until this evening, was the need for, or the utility of courage in creativity, and the tight connection between being courageous and creativity. And I think that the connecting material is learning how to operate in uncertainty. You know, in a VUCA environment, in an uncertain environment, in the environment today, I think in many ways, progressive education is all about learning the skills of operating successfully in an uncertain environment. You know, build a Brooklyn Bridge, you know, my God. You know, and learning how to do that successfully. And in a way, you're basically teaching people to be courageous in any uncertain environment. And there's nothing more powerful in terms of entrepreneurialism than knowing how to do that. And so that's one of the big takeaways for me tonight. Really very cool. Okay, so we have a bit of time left. How much time do we have left for questions and answers? 30. Okay, we have a couple of mics over here for people to, in the audience, please come up and ask some questions. We're live streaming, I think. Can we get some questions? I don't know how that's going to happen. If it's going to pop up on the screen here or on my watch or whatever, you know, or just let me know. I'll start off one question, then we'll quickly move to the audience, if that's okay. One question I'm always asked, and I wanted to ask the people here, is about putting together, how do you put together creative people into a working team? You know, how does that work? Because everyone is, you know, we're all creative, and you put a lot of creative people on a team, in a room, don't they all just, you know, go crazy and they're not effective? Or, you know, that's basically a business question to me. And I want to ask you, how does that work? How do you choose the people on your team? What are you looking for? How do you make it work? How do you lead it? Maybe we could start with David and go down.
I hate it when they start with me. I think, you know, I want to go back to the idea of courage, because I think part of the way to get, that I think creative people can collaborate together and work together is to have a sense of mission. And I do find that it's one of the things when things are really working, when I feel like there's a creative synergy, it's not because people are agreeing, it's because they're discussing or arguing around solving the same problem. And who said, Bruce, you said, part of the challenge is picking the right problem. And you know, in architecture, in my language, the word critique is used all the time, and trying to find sort of critical thinking, which I know is one of the words that were talked about here today. But I think that, and it's true, I mean, my lesson for that happened a lot in theater. Because you talk about collaboration in architecture where there's multiple firms working together, but in theater you've got 4 or 5 people in a dark room together collaborating in real time, and you have to solve it right then. And I actually know a director who says collaboration is the word designers thought of to feel like they have some say, kind of a cynical director. But I think if there is a common mission, if you find that purpose, and you're able, and the thing about courage creatively is safety doesn't get you anywhere. There really is no safety. If you're not innovating and taking a certain amount of risk, and that, you know, doing that together, I think acknowledging that and finding people who are curious and who don't feel like they know the answer before the project began, there's the higher likelihood that everyone is going to collide and create something they wouldn't have done on their own.
Yeah. Let me take this from you. I don't know if my mic is live. Okay. I don't think you see the advantage of me using my hands for mobility. I don't have to.
This is collaboration.
This is collaboration. Yeah. So let me piggyback off the comment, because you know, Vimeo, as it happens, is a company of about 120 people. So to all extent and purposes, it's like a venture-funded enterprise. And I'm probably twice the age of anybody else in the company, quite frankly. And it's really our job as management to first do what David said, which is point to that spot on the hill, create a sense of purpose, provide a mission, and then get the hell out of there. In other words, autonomy for those people that are doing the code or designing the product or creating the web page or coming up with a marketing campaign, they really revel in a degree of mastery and a degree of autonomy, quite frankly. And I would argue just in the last couple of days, we've released a whole new player design, and it like 50% faster than anything that we've ever seen before. And the publicity against this new release from a technical perspective and a user experience perspective has been phenomenal. And this is all done by, frankly, 25-year-olds. Completely stunning, in part because I think, the rest of us got out of the way.
I want to answer the question from the perspective of a teacher. Even though I said that I didn't think creativity can be taught, the fact of the matter is that you can look at some of these skills that we've been talking about all evening, and you can break them down into sub-skills, and you can help students by scaffolding, to learn some of those. So I think that one of the things that we want to do as teachers is be more explicit about how we do guide and how we do create the environments, and I do think that then we can move students and then eventually people to doing some of these things that we've been talking about tonight.
Yeah, so I think Mark's point about getting out of the way as managers is critical. Is one of the things that I tried to do at Kickstarter was you hire people to do a particular job. And for me, I'm a bit of a generalist. I'm decent in a number of things and not great at any of them. And so I hire people who are greater at those things that I'm not great at. So they're a little deeper. And my job essentially was to sort of guide and chaperone, kind of point to that hill, if you will. But with regard to looking at and assessing who you're talking to at the end of the table and taking some risk, if you will, to letting them into your family. I usually use that term because you do spend more time with your colleagues than you do with your loved ones at home, the irony of it. And there's a few factors. One is the ability, I think we talked about earlier, the ability to be resourceful or think on your feet. So engaging in dialogue is one, and how does one engage in dialogue and intellectually kind of process a problem? I don't care what the answer is, but I care about how you got there and how you debate the problem. And part of that process, part of that experience when going through, this is basically the interview cycle, is really trying to understand what the chemistry may be when you're confronted in one of those points of work which is difficult, a point of contention. What do you do when your back is up against the wall? Those are the most difficult points of any work life, but they happen with some frequency. And so I want to know like what someone's sort of end position is. The other one is sort of a silly one, but I think it's just as critically important as we were talking about play earlier, is can I hang out with you at a bar? Can I get a drink with you? Can I socialize with you? Do we have something in common? Is there some other chemistry outside of work? Again, I'm going to spend more time with you than my wife or my kid. I want to know that there's something more than just work. And so I think, to me, that is, we mentioned earlier, mission. I think the sort of cultural alignment of the individual with the organization is another factor that I've not heard talked about too frequently. It's usually about skill, and skill's really only half the battle. There's plenty of people out there that can design a site or code something up. It's a matter of can they do it and approach the problem in a way that is sort of intellectually aligned or sometimes opposed to how the culture of the organization represents itself.
Okay, thank you very much. Let's take some questions from the audience and get right into it. And identify yourself and ask a question.
Hi. My name is Julie Zuckerman. We had a nice drink a few years ago at Cafe Lou. I'm a principal of a progressive school in Washington Heights, a public school. I've been a public school educator for 30 years. I'm a fairly educated person. I think I'm kind of smart. I've been in New York a long time, and yet I feel like a complete foreigner here. That this is a conversation about progressive education that I had no idea I would be walking into. I hang out in a lot of progressive ed circles, and this is a conversation happening within the 1%. And this is a different conversation than what's going on in the rest of the city. And I just wanted to kind of say hello to you all and say that we are happily in this new progressive moment with de Blasio having been elected. I have a tremendous amount of concern about the point that the last gentleman made about the diminishing number of jobs that we have, and progressive education being about catching the 3 jobs that will be left when our children get into the job market. I think that what progressive education is about is caring about the problems that so face our community, the problems of poverty, the problems of hunger, the problems of the disappearance of the manufacturing sector. What we do in our school very much looks like what is going on at City and Country. I've visited, but I really think that it's so vitally, vitally important for all of us to get together and say, this is not just education for the 1%, because believe me, I had to hear a lot about our children don't need this kind of education in Washington Heights. Yeah, they do. All the kids need this. And I'm hoping that City and Country, I think Caroline Pratt, Helen Merritt, Elizabeth Irwin, the Harriets, Lucy Sprague Mitchell would be turning over in their graves if they didn't hear you guys talking about the connection to progressive politics.
Okay, that's fantastic. And important. Just a quick thought. One of the stitches that we almost made here, didn't quite make, but we almost, Mark, I think you almost got there, which is in this discussion about the connection between progressive education and entrepreneurialism and all of that. One of the key stitch is that as we go forward, the traditional middle-class jobs that we grew up with, our parents grew up with, they seem to be disappearing. And what is happening now and will happen further in the future is that we make our own middle-class jobs. And the tools for creating our own jobs, and many of them, are the tools that we get precisely from progressive education. I've been in touch with a lot of my I've been at Parsons for about 5 years, and I've been in touch with the graduates of the first year, and they've been out in the world for, 3-4 years. And most of them, most of them meaning 80% of them, maybe 20 people I'm still in contact with, are on their 3rd or 4th job. And maybe their first job was an interning, right, an internship, and their second job, but their 3rd job, and now they are directors of, right? And they're making, half of them have started their own companies, and the other half are, they're like moving incredibly fast. I mean, far faster than I ever moved, frankly. They are making, in a new world, most of them are in businesses that, again, our fathers are not in, but they're making it. And they're making it because they have the tools to do that. And I think that's the connection, the progressive connection between the education, the employment, and the way of life. And I think that's pretty much what we're all kind of getting at. And in a way, if I may, I wanted to, Charles, to get at this specifically with you, because you have been talking about the theory of 1,000 fans, which I love. Meaning, I'll tell you what you're meaning, right? Then you can tell me
it's not my thought. But.
Yeah, meaning that as the cost of creativity falls and the democratization of creativity and design expands, right? We can create lives and sustain a middle-class life more easily, very differently than, say my father who worked in the post office his whole life, right? But we can do, this is a new thing. It has enormous economic consequences, sure, but it also has enormous social consequences. Can you give us that theory a little bit?
Yeah, it's actually, so it's not mine, it's certainly not mine. It's Kevin, Kevin Kelly, is that right?
It's a Wired thing?
This is not associated with Wired, but he was one of the founders of Wired magazine. And he'd written a blog post a number of years ago called 1,000 True Fans. And what it was talking about was essentially what it took to create basically a living for yourself as an artist, as a musician. In this case was I think the storyline. It's definitely worth a read. Easy find, just 1,000 True Fans, and you'll find his post. And there's a bit of it sort of intertwined into Kickstarter. If you think about it, it's just about creating and pulling together a community of people that believe in what you do, and it's true fans. It's people that the story is it's the people that buy every single album. When it comes out, they're the first to buy it. They buy the duplicate that's the Japanese import, of the album, and they're just like goo gaga over your work. And it's just a matter of finding 1,000 of them. And now in the age of the internet and the web, now it's 1,000 people across the world. So it shrinks the world, but it gives you access to those perhaps quirky 1,000 people if you're really into obscure work. It gives people, I think, my interpretation of it, it gives those who are sort of working or exploring along the edge a chance at success independently. And I think if I will, like going off of the comments earlier, I agree with you, Bruce, that I think a lot of, at least the way I look at this, is it is about arming our children with the confidence, but also the tools, if you will, to be resilient and take chances and create their own future. I mean, like we were talking about earlier, we see kids running a store and thinking about the economics of the store. And one of the things I found kind of interesting today, and going through the tour and looking outside the stores, all the transactions of the store and the economics of the store plastered up on a wall.
Yeah, that's great.
Imagine what that does to the transformation of business transparency, which is something that we struggle with greatly in our era.
I hadn't thought about that.
What happens when those kids are 40 or 30 or 20, I know there are 20-year-olds running companies, and how their attitude towards the graying lines between a company and their community that support them.
That's very good. Yeah. Okay, another question. Question.
Hi. Oh, sorry. I want to follow up a little bit on that question, and then I came up with a different one because it was already asked. But I just want to make a distinction between people, the loss of middle-class jobs and the growth of poverty, because I don't think they're the same things. And many millions of children are growing up not with parents who are losing their middle-class jobs, but growing up in poverty and in school systems that look very, very different. So my question was more, I'm both a professor of education and I'm on the board of directors of the All-Stars Project, which is an outside of school growth and development program. My question was more about what kind of public policies we might need to foster this kind of growth and development that a very small percentage of kids get in school, and the vast majority, if they're going to get it, are going to probably get it outside of school. So that was a public policy question. And this one's a similar question for adults. So I was thinking, So there are people who come out of our school systems ready to be all of you, to be people who are entrepreneurs and creative and designing things. And then there's many other people who don't. What kinds of development do you think are needed for adults once they've left school to be able to make it in these environments and to participate fully and actively and to be on a day-to-day basis creative, whether it's in the workplace or in their relationships, so that they're able to think outside the box when, frankly, the 16 years of education they got might have taught them to not. So what do we need to do to develop the adults of the world in addition to the children?
Who's going to take that?
So you don't have to answer first?
So
A great question.
mean that this is not going to be an adequate answer to that question, but when we first observed kids playing with blocks and play dates, which were largely all in public schools set up by the city in all 5 boroughs, one of the things that was fascinating to me, first of all, there were a lot of adults standing around getting ready to jump in if anything happened. And of course, the boys would take the noodles and would fight for the first 10 minutes. And then mostly what would happen is people would build individual things. You would see stacking and building. But what started to happen 20 or 30 minutes into it is many kids would try and link their thing to someone else's thing. And they would start to think about collaborating to create, which required conversation and that's something we saw developing in a kind of huge way. And when the opportunity came for us to develop these as portable kits, and UNICEF approached us, we were surprised that in everything that might be needed as a sort of emergency relief in Haiti, that play would be one of the key things. But, and they've done a year worth of research, and they're putting together a report on that, and they're going deeper in the relationship with play with us. But it turns out it was a vital part of imagining a different future. And it was a vital part of believing you could have some sense of contribution to your outcome in collaboration. And so I do think that, you know, that's something I feel is missing, is the belief. Certainly play's been taken out of most programs because it's not affordable, let alone create a play. But it's not expensive, and I think part of it is about resource distribution. So as opposed to a $250,000 fixed playground that is great for motor skills, in addition to that, having people who are helping you and allowing you to have a safe creative space is, I think, in some small way, part of a solution.
I wonder if I could add something that we haven't really talked about tonight. So for the last year, I have been enmeshed, you could say, in MIT's experiment with something called MOOCs. Do you guys know what MOOCs? Oh, okay, so about half of you, and for the other half, it stands for Massive Open Online Courses. So Harvard, MIT, Stanford, the competitors, have started to launch these courses that you can actually take. They're free, and we've been doing research on the first one that had 155,000 people take the course at the same time. Now, I have to say, in the spirit of full disclosure, only 7,000 of them finished, but heck, 155,000 started, and that's what got on the front page of the New York Times. Now, the reason I said that is to answer to the question about what can we do once the students are out of high school or out of college. We haven't talked about the capabilities of technology and educational technology. Now, I am not, although I'm at MIT, and don't anybody quote me because I'll get in trouble, I am not an advocate necessarily of these massive open online courses. But let me tell you that technology, we don't know how to do it yet, I don't think, but technology provides an opportunity to respond to, I've lost track of, oh, there you are. Respond to the question you asked, which is that there are further possibilities for education and for creating the kinds of skills that we've been talking about tonight, but we don't know how to do it yet. So I say to the younger people in the audience, that's something that you can think about creatively and we can potentially harness. I also wanted to talk about the public policy issues. So as I said, because educational technology is something that the Obama administration has in fact been focusing on, I have in the last year become more and more aware of how enmeshed education actually is. You know, I've been fairly free of this because MIT has a huge endowment and it doesn't have to worry and it's a private institution. But I do think that you need to harness, I'm probably talking to the converted here, but you know, that you need to harness that. And I've seen what the established university lobbies can do when the government starts to get involved, and I think that it's going to be, I'll just say, an interesting, yes, set of events that will happen around college.
There was that was elegant. There was something in sort of piecing a few things that we've been talking about together. You asked a question about are we creating the box for these children, putting them out in the world that doesn't reflect the box. I was thinking again about my daughter and about 2 years ago, maybe a year and a half ago, in her development cycle, where it was all about individual play. And you sort of, she's not really playing well with her kids. You go on a play date and both kids go to the other end of the room and they play, and it's like a play date, but they're not really interacting. And the usual response is, just wait, they're just not there yet. And so I wonder myself, the question is, are we preparing them enough? Maybe we're trying to overcompensate too much, and we should just get out of the way, almost to Mark's point about management. And I think there's something that I see interesting in both of the programs that I've seen with progressive education, is that it is about essentially getting out of the way and getting involved when necessary, when you're asked to by the student, by the child, and providing some guidance and some coaching. And so maybe we just, again, maybe preaching to the converted, but we've probably been doing it wrong all these years, right? We've been doing it wrong in that we've been assuming that there's a box that you're going to go into. It's called a cubicle down the road. When in reality, it's rare that anyone that really aspires to work in a cubicle, there's sort of I'm going to be an astronaut, right? And so how do we create an environment where that dreaming continues, and perhaps realizing that as social animals, we'll figure it out. Maybe we build in all of these problems that we created, or that we see in terms of, why are we talking about collaboration when in reality, as children, we've seen this, that they just collaborate natively anyway. Maybe we stripped it out of ourselves.
And also, okay, go ahead. Do you want to, can you go up to the mic since they're sort of taping this? And
What do you think the possibilities of making more city schools more like city and country? I mean, would de Blasio, is that something that, it seems to me that the way kids are learning in most of the city schools are like I was learning 50 years ago. And, not that, but, so do you think de Blasio is open to that? Those kind of, that kind of school?
Answer that, and then I'll you can talk.
No, you.
I'm gonna say something that probably people won't like or necessarily agree with. I don't have a lot of hope for that, but I'm very hopeful. I think education, public education, has been around for a very long time, and it's going to be, it's not reformable. I think it has to be transformed. And I think there are many other options for supporting children's development that don't just have to be in school. And if we create those possibilities for all kids, playgrounds are one way to do it, after-school programs are another. I think if we create incredible quality outside of school programs, eventually the parents and children will say, why are we sending our kids there for 6 hours when they're doing these incredible things over here? But instead, our public policy has been in line with, it's not working for the first 6 hours, let's do the same thing for the next 6 hours, which to me is kind of the definition of insanity.
Brilliant. Okay. We have a question there. Okay.
Hi, my name is Joseph. I'm a graduate candidate at the School of Visual Arts, Products of Design, and I'm a New School alum. And the word that really stood out was something that you said, Bruce, was trust. I think it's just ingrained in progressive education. It's you trust the students that if they do what's natural, the process will play out for their eventual success. But I wonder how that can be applied, or how the trust can be reinforced, not just towards the students, but towards the teachers, how administrators can learn to trust their teachers, and how executives, you said, get out of the way, Mark, absolutely true in terms of giving the employees their autonomy, but how do you help the middle managers whose jobs are on the line to trust their lower level employees, and in turn, you to trust them?
Yeah, so let me try and address that, because in some respects, that's relatively straightforward. And as we were preparing for this evening, actually, you know, when we were trying to address questions, I have, my first company was started in 1995. It was the exact same year when Jeff Bezos was driving himself to Seattle to start Amazon, as the case. Now, his company happens to be worth, you know, probably 50 times any of the value that I've been able to create along the way. But I can tell you, in all of the high-risk sort of ventures that I have participated in, there are certain rules of the road, I think, that are becoming relatively standard. I would make the point, by the way, that New York City happens to be an extraordinary place for beginning to think about sort of the distribution of information in a way that's much less frictionless than has been in the past. The types of very informal community sort of functions that are beginning to develop now, sort of socially based, that cost absolutely nothing. So anybody from wherever with the slightest bit of initiative can begin to sort of enter into that conversation. Now, moving it into the workplace, there are pretty standard criteria here, I would argue, in terms of whether it's a senior person or a middle-level person. As I said, you basically establish where you're going, define some strategies, get some passion, get some buy-in, establish a degree of trust, to your point, and it is absolutely magical to see extraordinary work happening in all different categories in the company, simply by adhering to these common principles.
Okay, well, okay, the very last question.
Thank you. Hello, good evening. My name is Zuleika Fertulian. I'm the founder of Beyond Basic Learning, the international school, where I'm a progressive school in Hoboken, New Jersey. I started as an entrepreneur just by thought, being open with my families, being very creative. I just recently joined another group, a network of students younger than I am, developing a software, developing a program, and they're already into bit money, bitcoins, already trading it, mining it, and it really puts progressive education into perspective about what you raised about the middle class. And one of the things that was also raised was about being able to hang out with them afterwards, having drinks, developing those relationships. How are we harnessing those ideas and talents in a diverse way? So not only you see the top 5 companies there being like mobile and Google, but you're also bringing in women and you're bringing in diversity to help become part of the leadership team. Because what I've noticed is that I'm the only Hispanic African-American woman that owns a progressive independent school. And I have an international reach. I place children internationally all the way from Oman, Saudi Arabia, France, But when I go to the meetings, which I was happy to see the City and Country had Millie Cartagena in their repertoire of people that focuses on diversity, progressive education based simply alone on the fact that it is expensive because of the nature of the location, the staffing, and our vision, because I'm a Bank Street graduate as well, really takes away the diversity. So thinking about diversity, thinking about integrating talent and critical thinking and great ideas, how do we then create that social connection? Because these two young students that have their own company, Apple, I met them at Via Pianos, an entrepreneurship meeting when I was getting ready to pick up my husband. And I said, well, I have a couple hours to kill. And so here I am at Pianos in a Korean setting, and they just happen to be the only two American people there, and we just happen to connect. But that doesn't happen all the time amongst diversity. African American Hispanics do not venture bars in a social setting. They go to other venues. And so we kind of disconnect a lot of talent that could exist. And so what are your thoughts about bringing diversity to help harness that critical thinking, bringing forth those opportunities to engage after work that would have provided across mediums and across people's cultures, so we can really take advantage of what New York City here has to offer at various levels?
I think that last comment really presents a wonderful way to end the evening, which is, this is the great challenge to progressive education, which in the past and perhaps in today has been an expensive way of doing things. And the great challenge is perhaps to lower the cost, to find a way to massify it, to bring it to a larger number of people in some fashion, and to make it available to virtually anyone who wants it and who needs it. And that is a wonderful challenge ahead. And using progressive education and the tools that it has would be a great way to meet that challenge and to come up with other models, different price points of models that we could use in public education and elsewhere. So thank you for that. I think that's fantastic. Thank you very much, everyone. Thank you, panel. Thank you, audience, for coming on a Friday night. Thank you, City and Country.